So, here we are. Today I was doing some detail mapping at mere 4 kilometers north of camp when the mists lifted in the midday warmth, and I noticed a series of terraces on my side of the cleft that had been hidden until then. I was using my powered glasses to inspect the terraces. Actually, a series of laddered ledges, spires, shelves, and tussocks extending far out onto the overhang. When I realized that I was staring at man-made habitations, the dozen or so huts were crude, rough hovels of heaped holme fronts, stoned and sponge turf, but they were unmistakably a human origin. I was standing there, irresolute, binoculars still lifted, trying to decide whether to climb down to expose ledges and confront the inhabitants or to retreat to my camp, when I felt that lifting chill along the back and neck that tells one with absolute certainty that he is no longer alone. I lowered the binoculars and turned slowly. The Bikura were there, at least 30 of them, standing in a semicircle that left me retreat to the forest. I do not know what I expected. Naked savages, perhaps, with fierce expressions and necklaces of teeth. Perhaps I had half expected to find the kind of bearded, wild-haired hermits that travelers sometimes encountered in the Mosh Mountains of Hebron. Whatever I had held in mind, the reality of the Bikura did not fit the template. The people who had approached me silently were short. None came higher than my shoulder and swathed in roughly woven dark robes that covered them from neck to toe. When they moved, as some did now, they seemed to glide over the rough ground like rats. Vrats, like rats, not rats, like vrats. Souls just flying in the air. As empty, no, where am I? Moved, some did rats. From a distance, their appearance reminded me of nothing so much a gaggle of diminutive Jesuits at a new Vatican enclave. I almost gigged them, but realized that such a response might well be a sign of rising panic. The Bikura showed no outward signs of aggression to cause such a panic. They carried no weapons, their small hands were empty as their expressions. Their physiognomy is hard to describe succinctly. They are bald, all of them. That baldness, the absence of any facial hair, and the loose robes that fell in a straight line to the ground, all conspired to make it very difficult to tell the man from woman. The group now confronting me, more than 50 by this time, looked to be all of roughly the same age, somewhere between 40 and 50 standard years. Their faces were smooth, the skin tightened with a yellowish cast that I guessed might be associated with generations of ingesting trace minerals in the chalma and other local plant life. One might be tempted to describe the round faces of the Bikura as cherubic, until upon closer inspection that impression of sweetness fades and is replaced by another interpretation. Placid idiocy. Placid idiocy. As a priest, I have placid idiocy? What is it? Extremely stupid behavior. Alright, so idiocy. As a priest, I have spent enough time on backward worlds to see the effect of an ancient genetic disorder variously called Down syndrome. Mongolism, or Generation Ship legacy. This, then, was the overall impression created by the 60 or so dark-robed little people who had approached me. I was being greeted by a silent, smiling band of bald, retarded children. I reminded myself that there were almost certainly the same group of smiling children who had still slit Tuk's throat while he slept and left him to die like a butchered pig. The closest Bikura stepped forward, stopped 5 paces from me, and said something in a soft monotone. "Just a minute," I said, and fumbled out my comlog. I tapped in the translator function. "Bejete ota memelon krevstetket?" asked the short man in front of me. I slipped on the herb lag, just in time to hear the comlog translation. There was no lag time. The apparently foreign language was a simple corruption of archaic seed-ship English, so far removed from the indigenous argot of the plantations. "You are the man who belongs to the cross-shape, cruciform," interpreted the comlog, giving me 2 choices for the final noun. "Yes," I said, knowing now that these were the ones who had touched me the night I slept through Tuk's murder, which meant that these were the ones who had murdered Tuk. I waited. The hunting macer was in my pack. The pack. The pack was set against a small chalma not 10 paces from me. Half a dozen Bikura stood between me and it. It did not matter. I knew at that instant that I would not use a weapon against another human being, even a human being who had murdered my guide and might well be planning to murder me at any second. I closed my eyes and said a silent act of contrition. When I opened my eyes, more of the Bikura had arrived. There was a cessation of movement, as if aquarium had been filled, a decision reached. "Yes," I said again into the silence. "I am the one who wears the cross." I heard the comlog speaker pronounce the last word, "Kresfem." The Bikura nodded in unison and, as if from long practice as altar boys, all went to on a knee, rabbits rustling softly in a perfect genuflection. I opened my mouth to speak and found that I had nothing to say. I closed my mouth. The Bikura stood. A breeze moved the brittle chalma fronds and leaves together to make a dry end of summer sound above us. The Bikura nearest to me on the left stepped closer, grasped my forearm with a touch of cool, strong fingers, and spoke of a soft sentence that my comlog translated as, "Come, it's time to go to the house and sleep." It was a mid-afternoon. Wondering if the comlog had translated the word sleep properly, or if there might be an idiom or metaphor for die, I nodded and followed them towards the village and the edge of the cleft, at the edge of the cleft. Now I sit in the hut and wait. There are rustling sounds. Someone else is awake now. I sit and wait. Day 97. The Bikura all call themselves the 70. I have spent the past 26 hours talking to them, observing, making notes when they take their 2-hour mid-afternoon sleep, and generally trying to record as much data as I can before they decide to slit my throat. Except now I'm beginning to believe that they will not hurt me. I spoke to them yesterday after our sleep. Sometimes they do not respond to questions, and then they do not respond. The responses are little better than the grounds or divergent answers on receivers from slow children. After their initial question and invitation at our first encounter, none of them originated a single query of comment my way. I questioned them subtly, carefully, cautiously, and with the professional calm of a trained anthologist. I asked the simplest, most factual questions possible to make sure that the camlog was functioning properly. It was, but the sum total of the answers left me amongst as ignorant as I had been 20-some hours before. Finally, tired in body and spirit, I abandoned professional subtlety and asked the group I was sitting with, "Did you kill my companion?" My 3 interlocutors did not look up from the weaving they were doing on a crowd loom. "Yes," said the one I have come to think of as Alpha because he had been the first to approach me in the forest. "We cut your companion's throat with the sharpened stone and held him down and silent while he struggled. He died the true death." "Why?" I asked after a moment. "Why?" My voice sounded as dry as corn husk crumbling. "Why did he die? The true death," said Alpha, still not looking up. "Because all of his blood ran out and he stopped breathing." "No," I said. "Why did you kill him?" Alpha did not respond, but Betty, who may or may not be female and Alpha's maid, looked up from her loom and said simply, "To make him die." "Why?" The responses invariably came back and just as invariably failed to enlighten me one iota. After much questioning, I had ascertained that they had killed Tuk to make him die, and that he had died because he had been killed. "What is the difference between death and true death?" I asked, not trusting the Camlock or my Templar at this point. The third Bikura, Del, grounded a response that the Camlock interpret as, "Your companion died the true death. You did not." Finally, in frustration, far too close to rage, I snapped, "Why not? Why didn't you kill me?" All 3 stopped in the middle of their mindless waving and looked at me. "You cannot be killed because you cannot die," said Alpha. "You cannot die because you belong to the cruciform and follow the way of the cross." I had no idea why the damned machine would translate cross as a cross. 1 second as a cruciform, the next, because you belong to the cruciform. A chill went through me, followed by the urge to laugh. Had I stumbled into that old adventure hollow cliché, that lost tribe that worshipped the god that had trampled into the jungle until the poor bastard cut himself shaving or something, and the tribe's people, assured and a bit relieved at the obvious mortality of their visitor, offer up their erstwhile Dicely as a sacrifice? It would have been funny if the image of Tuk's bloodless face and raw remitted gaping wood was not so fresh. Their action to the cross centrally suggested that it had encountered a group of survivors of one Christian colony, Catholics, even through the data in the Camlock instead that the dropship of 70 colonists who had crashed on this planet 400 years ago had held on in Neo-Carven Marxist, all of whom should have been indifferent, if not openly hostile, to the old religions. I considered dropping the matter as being far too dangerous to pursue, but my stupid need to know drove me on. "Do you worship Jesus?" I asked. Their blank expression left no need for a verbal negative. "Christ?" I tried. "Jesus Christ? Christian? The Catholic Church?" No interest. "Catholic Jesus Mary? St. Peter? Paul? St. Teilhard?" The Camlock made noises, but the words seemed to have no meaning for them. "You follow the cross?" I said, flaying for some last contact. All 3 looked at me. "We belong to the cruciform," said Alpha. I nodded, understanding nothing. "This evening I will sleep briefly just before sunset, and when I awoke I was to the organ pipe music of the cleft wingful winds. It was much louder here on the village ledges. Even the howls seemed to join the chorus as the rising gust wastelet whined through stone gaps, flapping fronds and crow's smoke holes. Something was wrong. It made me groggy. Minute to realize that the village was abandoned. Every hood was empty. I sat on the cold boulder and wondered if my presence had sparked some mass exodus. The wind music had ended, and meteors were beginning their nightly show through cracks in low clouds, when I heard a sound behind me and turned to find all 70 of the 70 behind me. They walked past without a word and went to their huts. There were no lights. I imagined them sitting in their hovels, staring. I stayed outside for some time before returning to my own hut. After a while I walked to the edge of the grassy shelf and stood where rock dropped away into the abyss. A cluster of vines and roots clung to the cliff face but appeared the end a few meters into space and hung 3 above emptiness. No vine could have been long enough to offer a way to the river 2 kilometers below. But the Bikura had come from this direction. Nothing made sense. I shook my head and went back to my hut. Sitting here, writing by the light of the Camlock Disky, I tried to think of precautions I can take to ensure that I will see the sunrise. I can think of none. Day 103. The more I learn, I less understand. I have moved most of my gear to the hut. They leave empty for me here in the village. I have taken photographs, recorded video and audio chips, and imagine a full holoscan of the village and its inhabitants. They not seem to care. I project their images and they walk right through them, showing no interest. I play back their worlds to them and they smile and go back into their hovels and sit for hours doing nothing, saying nothing. I offer them trade trinkets and they take them without comments, check to see if they are edible, and then leave them lying. The grass is littered, and with plastic beads, beds, mirrors, bits of colored cloth and cheap pens. I have set up the full medical lab, but to no avail. The 70 will not let me examine them, will not let me take the blood samples, even though I had repeatedly shown them that it is painless, will not let me scan them with the I find myself hoping that catch a glimpse of a naked Bikura. This is not easy for a Jesuit of 48 standard years to admit. Still, it would be an easy task even for a veteran voyeur. The nudity taboo seems absolute. They wear the log's robes while awake and during their 2-hour midday nap. They leave the village area to urinate and defecate, and I suspect that they do not remove the loose robes even then. They do not seem to bathe. One would suspect that this would cause olfactory problems, but there is no odor about the primitives except for the slight sweet smell of chalma. You must undress sometimes, I said to Alpha one day. Abandoning delicacy in favor. You must undress sometimes, I said to Alpha one day. Abandoning delicacy in favor of information. No, said I, and went somewhere to sit and do nothing while fully dressed. They have no names. I found this incredible at first, but now I am sure. We are all that was and will be, said the shortest Bikura. One of things of as female and called Epi, we are the 70. I searched the Camlock records and confirmed that I suspected. In more than 16,000 known human societies, none are listed where there are no individuals' names at all. Even in the loosest hive societies, even individuals respond to their class category followed by a simple code. I tell them my name and they stare. Father Paul Dure, repeats the Camlock translator, but there is no attempt at even simple repetition. Except for their mass disappearances each day before sunset and their common 2-hour sleep time, they do very little as a group. Even their logging arrangements appear random. All will spend on a nap time with Betty, the next with Gam, and the third with Zeta or Pete. No system or schedule is apparent. Every third day, the entire group of 70 goes into the forest to forage and return with berries, chalma roots and bark, fruit and whatever else might be eatable. I was sure they were vegetarians until I saw Dell munching on the cold corpse of an infant arboreal. The little primate must have fallen from high branches. It seems then that the 70 do not digest meat. They simply are too stupid to hunt and kill it. I mean, they can digest meat, and then do not disdain. Disdain? What does it mean? Disdain, the feeling that someone or something is unworthy of one's consideration or respects. When the Bikura are thirsty, they walk amongst 300 meters to a stream that cascades into the cleft. In spite of the inconvenience, there are no signs of water, skins, jugs, or any type of pottery. I keep my reserve of water in 10-gallon plastic containers, but the villagers take no notice. In my plummeting respect for these people, I do not find it unlikely that they have spent generations in a village with no handy water source. Who built the houses, I ask? They have no word for village. The 70 responds will. Response will. I can tell him from the others only by broken finger that did not mend well. Each of them has at least one such distinguishing feature, although sometimes I think it would be easier to tell crows apart. When did they build them, I ask Thro. I should know by now that any question that starts with when will not receive any answer. I receive no answer. They do not into the cleft each evening. Down the wines on the third evening, I tried to observe this exodus, but 6 of them turned me back from the edge and gently but persistently brought me back to my hut. It was the first observable action of the Bikura that had hinted at aggression, and I sat in some apprehension after they had gone. The next evening, as they departed, I went quietly to my hut, not even peering out, but after they returned I retrieved the Imaginer and its tripod from where I had left them near the edge. The timer had worked perfectly. The hollows showed the Bikura grabbing the vines and scrambling down the cliff's face as nimbly as little arborelids that filled the chalma and winewood forests. Then they disappeared under the overhang. What do you do when you do go down cliff each evening? I asked the next day. The native looked at me with this surreptic, Hudal smile, and I have learned to hate. You belong to the cruciform, he said, as if that answered everything. Do you worship when you go down the cliff? I asked. No answer. I thought a minute. I also follow the cross, I said, knowing that I would be translated as belong to the cruciform. And any day now I will not need to translator program. But this conversation was too important to leave the chance. Does this mean that I should join you when you go down the cliff face? For a second I thought that all was thinking. His brow furrowed, and I realized that it was the first time that I had seen one of the 70 come close to frowning. Then he said, You cannot. You belong to the cruciform, but you are not of the 70. I realized that I had taken every neuron and synapse of his brain to frame that distinction. What would you do if I did go down the cliff face? I asked, expecting no response. Hypothetical questions almost always had as much luck as my time-based queries. This time he did respond. The seraphic smile and untroubled countenance returned, and Alpha said softly, If you try to go down the cliff, we will hold you down on the grass, take sharpened stones, cut your throat, and wait until your blood stopped flowing and your heart stopped beating. I said nothing. I wondered if the cold heard the pounding of my heart at the moment. Well, I thought, at least you don't have to worry any longer that they think you are a god. The silence stretched. Finally, Al added one more sentence that I have been thinking about ever since. And if you did it again, he said, we would have to kill you again. We started to each other for some time after that, each convinced, I am sure, that the other was a total idiot. Day 104. Each new revelation... Alright, I'll finish here.